Welcome to Jimmyism Total Nerdery channel. When moving your system to an SSD, you should check that it actually is optimized. However, there is a tremendous amount of outdated, even archaic tips that no longer applies, or even makes your system slower. Let me first bust common tips that are completely useless for Windows 10 users. Some of the old tips were valid when SSD disks were new, but as of Windows 10 and newer, there is absolutely no need to do things like reinstall Windows when you instead put in an SSD and move your system there. Also, you don't need to disable the paging file, it's very unnecessary. System protection is no need to turn that off if you have it on. And disk indexing don't need to be disabled. It's better to leave it on to better performance. And Windows Search shouldn't disable that, it will just make your searching slower. And then we have Windows 10 auto disables superfetch, prefetch and ready boost, so that's things you don't need to do like manually. High performance power plan doesn't have an effect on the SSD, and Hibernate can still be on. So that's some common tips that doesn't have any effect anymore. Windows 10 recognizes when you use an SSD disk, even if you move your entire system to it. Windows 10 sees it and makes some appropriate changes to the system. Now, let us move on to what you actually should do to optimize your drive. To actually experience the full performance of your SSD, it is very important that it has some free space. If you have less than 10% free of the drive, you'll need to immediately remove some old files. I'd recommend you to use WinDirstat to easily see which files take a lot of place, and thereby being able to remove them and free up some space. Temporary files may also take a lot of space and should be cleaned regularly. This is easy to do with CCleaner tool. Then you also need to make sure that your SSD is connected to a SATA 3 connector. A SATA 3 connector has the speed of 6 gigabit per second. SATA 2 and SATA 1 are slower. So make sure that inside your computer, the data cable, the SATA cable, is connected to the motherboard in a SATA 3 or SATA Express slot. If you're using an M2 SSD drive, you can ignore this little tip. If you don't want to open up your computer to see which SATA connector your disk is connected to, well, then you can install this free tool, Crystal Disk Info. Here you can see, here we have my main drive, and we have interface, serial ATA, transfer mode, SATA 6, SATA 6. Beautiful. And here you'll see if it's M2 as well, if you don't even have a SATA 1. If it's M2, it's also fine. There are different standards for controlling the SATA connectors. If you have an old motherboard, you might need to check that it's not set on IDE. To do this, you get the device manager by search or right-clicking the Windows button for Pro. And here inside the device manager, you can see the IDE, ATA, ATPI controllers. Expand this. Here we can see Intel Series Chipset Family SATA AHCI controller. And that is the faster one. If it instead says IDE, you'll need to change this setting in your BIOS. You usually can reach your BIOS by pressing F10 or delete, dependent on the model. Now, some other optimization tutorials might tell you to turn off defrag. Well, that's not really something you want to do, because Windows 10 trims the drive, it doesn't defrag the SSD drives. To check that the trim is on, what you can do is you go to optimize drives. Inside here, we can see the solid state drive and we can click optimize. And now it will trim the drive. Beautiful. Here we can see that scheduled optimization is turned off. Turn this on. This will make sure that the drive runs optimally and will not decrease its performance. If you want to defragment an SSD drive, you'll need another software to do that reliably. However, if you have an SSD drive that the server runs on, it is a possibility that it might get extremely fragmented. In such special cases, you might actually need to defragment the SSD drive to get back to normal performance. But if you're a normal home user, you never need to defragment an SSD drive. Popular SSD manufacturers like Western Digital, Seagate, Crucial, SanDisk, Toshiba, Samsung and Intel does have special tools which can optimize your drive. You might actually need this tool to get all the features and performance from your SSD. It is my recommendation that you download the software that corresponds to the brand you have. In this software, you can do some very nice things. Like for example, this is Samsung Magician, the tool you should use for all Samsung drives. Here you can click on Update and you can make sure that Samsung Magician and the Samsung SSD has the latest updates and firmware. This will help with performance as well. In this particular software, you can also see that the interface indeed is SATA 3, which means 6 gigabit per second, which is nice. And that we also have the AHCI mode activated. Well, then we also can go down to performance optimization. Here we can see that special features for this disk is enabled or not. Rapid mode enhances overall system performance. For this Samsung drive, it's highly recommended that you use this. Therefore, I have this activated. This particular software also checks that you have trim status enabled. You can also have a shortcut to your trimming optimized drives from Windows there too. Now, one thing that is very important to be able to have the full performance from your SSD is to do something that is called over-provisioning. Over-provisioning is leaving a part of your drive unformatted. I go through this in my tutorial on how to transfer your system to a new drive using Macrium Reflect. In that software, I have set up some over-provisioning. However, in Samsung Magician, you can also set a specific over-provisioning percentage or size inside this tool, which is really nice. I would just need to click Clear OP and select a new value. It is recommended that you have between 10 and 20% of your space as over-provisioned, which means unallocated. This will both increase performance, but most importantly, it will increase the lifetime of your SSD a lot as well. Therefore, it's very recommended to have over-provisioning of between at least 10 to 20%. Even though you have a large part of your drive as over-provisioned, you still need to have at least 10% free space on the drive as well. And this last step, we are going to make sure that your partition is aligned correctly. If it's not, it might have a negative impact on the performance. Now, this might seem complex, but it's actually really easy. To check this, we will start System Info. System Information. Inside the System Info, you need to go into Components. From Components, you go to Storage. From Storage, you go to Disks. Inside this, you can see Partition Starting Offset. This partition is of course a smaller one. We need to go down to the main partition, which is the 1.6 terabyte one. Here you can see it's Partition Starting Offset. what you need to do now is to get your calculator. Write in whatever value the partition starting offset is for your main partition. Then you'll need to divide this by 4096. If this is evenly dividable, which means you don't get a lot of decimals, your partition is aligned. Congratulations! If it is not, you might need to reinstall your system, or look at my tutorial on how to transfer your system to a new drive using Macroom Reflect, which will make sure that the partition is aligned. Most major similar softwares does make sure that your partition is aligned. It is, however, important that it is aligned, so it might be a good thing to check. I hope that this tutorial has helped you to make sure that your SSD drive is optimized, and also make sure you don't do any unnecessary things that might actually slow down your system. Then you should definitely leave a like. Do also subscribe for future nice tips. Hope you stay around and see you in a future video. This is Jimmy from Total Nerdery channel, officially signing out.